Now we're going to start thinking about the way others might perceive us, the labels or fixed ideas people have and where they might come from. Sometimes they're based on stereotypes, and stereotypes have a type of story that we tell about individuals based on our beliefs, which might be false, or it might be true, about a group which they belong to. Stereotypes could be grounded in reality, like the idea that the English like their tea. I didn't grow up drinking tea at all, and I found it really weird when anyone offered me a cup of tea, because we just drank water in my household. And then I finally got that I was being like rude whenever I said no to a cup of tea. So yeah, we need to be careful about them because they simplify people. And as we just explored, we're all incredibly complex. So in this section, we're going to think about the relationship between stories and stereotyping, what it means to have a single story of a person or a group of people. We're going to watch the Nigerian writer Chimamanda Adichie's TED Talk, a section of it, and I do recommend you watching all of it, like when you'd have the time.
I'm a storyteller, and I would like to tell you a few personal stories about what I like to call the danger of the single story. I grew up on a university campus in eastern Nigeria. My mother says that I started reading at the age of 2, although I think 4 is probably close to the truth. So I was an early reader, and what I read were British and American children's books. I was also an early writer. And when I began to write at about the age of 7, stories in pencil with crayon illustrations that my poor mother was obligated to read, I wrote exactly the kinds of stories I was reading. All my characters were white and blue-eyed. They played in the snow. They ate apples. And they talked a lot about the weather, how lovely it was that the sun had come out. Now, this despite the fact that I lived in Nigeria. I had never been outside Nigeria. We didn't have snow. We ate mangoes. And we never talked about the weather because there was no need to. My characters also drank a lot of ginger beer because the characters in the British books I read drank ginger beer. Never mind that I had no idea what ginger beer was. And for many years afterwards, I would have a desperate desire to taste ginger beer. But that is another story. What this demonstrates, I think, is how impressionable and vulnerable we are in the face of a story, particularly as children. Because all I had read were books in which characters were foreign, I had become convinced that books, by their very nature, had to have foreigners in them and had to be about things with which I could not personally identify. Now, things changed when I discovered African books. There weren't many of them available, and they weren't quite as easy to find as the foreign books, but because of writers like Chinua Achebe and Kamara Laye, I went through a mental shift in my perception of literature. I realized that people like me, girls with skin the color of chocolate, whose kinky hair could not form ponytails, could also exist in literature. I started to write about things I recognized. Now, I loved those American and British books I read. They stirred my imagination. They opened up new worlds for me. But the unintended consequence was that I did not know that people like me could exist in literature. So what the discovery of African writers did for me was this. It saved me from having a single story of what books are. I come from a conventional middle-class Nigerian family. My father was a professor. My mother was an administrator. And so we had, as was the norm, live-in domestic help who would often come from nearby rural villages. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and our old clothes to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your food. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide's family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit. And his mother showed us a beautifully patterned basket made of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them. Years later, I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this: she had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me, as an African, was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. I must say that before I went to the US, I didn't consciously identify as African. But in the US, whenever Africa came up, people turned to me, never mind that I knew nothing about places like Namibia. But I did come to embrace this new identity, and in many ways I think of myself now as African, although I still get quite irritable when Africa is referred to as a country, the most recent example being my otherwise wonderful flight from Lagos 2 days ago, in which there was an announcement on the Virgin flight about their charity walk in India, Africa, and other countries. So after I had spent some years in the US as an African, I began to understand my roommate's response to me. If I had not grown up in Nigeria, and if all I knew about Africa were from popular images, I too would think that Africa was a place of beautiful landscapes, beautiful animals, and incomprehensible people fighting senseless wars, dying of poverty and AIDS, unable to speak for themselves, and waiting to be saved by a kind white foreigner. I would see Africans in the same way that I, as a child, had seen Fide's family.
There are so many incredible things to talk about from that video, and there is a lot to take in. And we really do recommend you watching the whole video if you have time, and it's in the handout, the link to that video. So we're going to put you into breakout rooms of 3 next, and invite each person to spend 2 minutes just sharing their thoughts, and you'll have a couple of minutes at the end to share your views together, if that's okay. If you've had any initial thoughts, just put them down so you don't forget them. Oh, well, yeah, I hope that was interesting. It was really interesting, my group. Lots of things came out, quite emotional as well. A little later in that video, Chimamanda Ngozi, she says, a single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. And this idea that one story becomes the only story is quite unjust. If people have one story about us, then we know we are complicated beings, and that hundreds and thousands of stories apply to us. It feels really frustrating, or as if we haven't been understood properly. And there's something quite transformative in viewing stereotypes as single stories, because written into that phrase is their two-dimensional nature, and the fact that there is a lot missing. There are other stories that are not being told.
With this shot.
So having, sorry, my 4-year-old's talking. Having single stories about people does lead to bigotry and misunderstandings. So as highlighted in the title of the talk, single stories are dangerous if we focus on them at the expense of our common humanity. And they are difficult to get away from. Would like to share what their responses were? Thank you so much for sharing that, because it brings up quite a lot of adrenaline, doesn't it? Like, oh, where have I done this? I've made mistakes. Do we have any more time, Anira, or do we need to move
No,
on?
I'm sorry. We have to move on. Sorry, I know that loads of people want to share, but you will get a chance to share in a moment a bit more as well. And then in the breakout groups, it gives you everyone a chance to speak rather than just a few. So what we want you to do now is think about the stories that you have, so that you might hold about others, or that you've been exposed to. And where you might have heard them, kind of like, and we'll also get you a chance, give you a chance to think about ones that others might have about you. But first of all, I'm going to give you 90 seconds on a clock, and I want you to think about what are the single stories that you have held about others, or that you have heard about others. There's often a bit of an overlap there. So ones that single stories that you've heard about others. This could be groups in society, or that you've personally held, and just you can take notes on those if you want, or you can just reflect. Okay, and now we want you to think about what single stories have others heard or held about you. Okay, next we're going to give you the opportunity to kind of a timeline activity, thinking about when these stories, single stories, might have come into your life, when they might have been more prominent. And I'm just going to show you an example of my one, and I'll just talk you through it a bit, and then give you a chance to do your own if it helps to organize them in this way. So I've done ones that I've held, that I've been exposed to, or that I've held, and often there is overlap. And I kind of coloured them in different ways and just tried to make them in this little timeline. And so ones, let's see, when I was younger, in fact, I'll go with the adults. I always thought that adults knew best. And actually my parents didn't know best a lot, and they weren't always the kind of, I think assuming that adults knew best probably kind of had negative impacts, because it made you feel like you were doing something wrong all the time. And then I kind of like realized that this wasn't the case, and realized that adults are also fallible. But then when I became a teacher, it just then came into this thing again of adults knowing best, and I just saw teachers treat children horribly, but students couldn't protest because adults knew best, and if they protested they got in trouble. And so that's something that I kind of like am very aware of. White equals right. For that, I grew up, in the UK, always kind of being surrounded by white people in positions of power, watching white people on TV, so always having this story, kind of, even if it wasn't explicitly said, implicitly, always everywhere, that white is right. And I myself, I mean, an example of that is the fact that I wasn't even aware really of the color of my skin and the privilege that came with that, and that slowly decreased. And now finally, I think as a society we're starting to look at that and question these implicit messages and this bias, and also these explicit messages and systemic racism. Americans are stupid. That's one that I've kind of always heard, probably that has increased with Trump being there, but obviously that's also not a very nice thing to think. So it's important to reflect that. And also, how am I grouping a whole country of 300 million into one thing? Other ones, that success is like money, and I definitely believe that. My parents didn't have very much money when we were growing up, and I was always like, I want to be rich, I want to be able to own a house, because I didn't own a house, and I want to do this, and I really equated success with money. And now, like, that's really far away from where I am, which I'm very thankful for. So yeah, I'm going to give you a few minutes to think about your own single stories and timelines and where they've been. And it can be ones that people have held about you, or it can be ones that you've held or that you've been exposed to. And it's just quite an interesting exercise to see how you've changed, but also how prevalent these stories are and how much they impact us and our behavior and our relationships with people as well. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes to make your own timeline in whatever version you want, but I'll leave mine here so that you can see it. Okay, and I'm going to put you into breakout groups. And in these breakout groups, please only share information that you feel comfortable sharing. So if you decide that you don't want to join your breakout group, that's completely fine, and you just want to have some reflection time, that's also completely fine. And yeah, if you kind of do go to it, then just only share things. You don't have to show your timeline, just share any reflections that you have from that activity and only information you feel comfortable sharing. So we're going to put you in smaller ones this time because it's a bit more personal. And we'll put you in them for 5 minutes, but yeah, you don't have to join it if you don't want to. And if you find that you're alone in your breakout group and you'd rather be with people, then you can leave it and come back, and I will always be in this main room. So yeah, the rooms have been created, and yeah, see you shortly. See you in 5 minutes. Thank you. Welcome back, people who are coming back. We're just having Mac and I are just having a chat in this main room. If you're in a room by yourself, apologies. We just don't want to kind of put, this one can be quite sensitive for people to reflect on. So I think it's really important to give people the choice to whether or not they want to talk about it with others. But we'll just wait for everyone to come back. I think everyone is back. Okay, great. Well, we've got one final activity. Hester is going to take you through that.
Hi, sorry, just trying to get some quiet around here. My breakout pairing, I felt quite emotional doing that actually. So moving on with those thoughts still in our mind, we can look beyond the single stories by showing curiosity to understand people better and by asking questions. So now we'd like you to have a think about some specific examples of how we could respond to assumptions, and starting with ourselves, considering these questions. So yeah, one way to look beyond the single story, that's a repeat of the last thing, sorry. What could someone who has a single story of us ask us to understand you better? So what could someone who has a single story about you ask you to understand you better? And we're going to give you a minute to do that. Okay. And the next question is, what could you ask someone you have held a single story about to understand them better? So what question could you ask someone you have held a single story about to understand them better? And we've got a minute to respond. Thanks, guys. So I just want to say that that everyone makes assumptions, and we're all raised with single stories. So at some point what we're going to be believing in a single story. So it's not something to feel guilty about, but it is something to be aware of, because the more we start to question our understanding of the world, the more we'll learn, and the more we start to understand that everything and everyone is really complex, the more we will catch ourselves when we are generalizing. We don't want to rob people of their humanity by boiling them down to one thing. So if you catch yourself doing it, don't berate yourself. Be proud that you've realized it, and think about how to move forward. Yeah, it's really important to be kind to ourselves and to think that this is always a process that's ongoing. We're not suddenly going to be able to break out of that social mold that's shaped us since childhood, and forget the stories that have we've been repeatedly told, or like repeatedly fed. We need to continue to take stock, reflect and learn, and also remember that we are taking time to engage with others humanely and justly, and to also to do that with ourselves. So be kind. I think we might back to Anira.
Oh no. I was going to say, if anyone would like to share their questions that they wrote in the chat, we'd love to see some, if anyone wants to share them. And then we will start wrapping up. And we do really appreciate, what you laugh, thank you. We do really appreciate the feedback, and we apologise in terms of timing it. It's just really hard to be able to do this and finish on time. But we hope that these things will lead you to having these discussions with people. But there are some lovely questions coming up. What's important to you? What are you passionate about? What inspires you? I like Sian, tell me about, there you go, leaving it really open. What was it like growing up? What motivates you? These are lovely. Thank you so much. We will save these as well. And we've got some beautiful questions from Monday's session. So we'll be sure to try and to keep lists of these as well, and share them with you. So in terms of, yeah, please do keep typing them. They're lovely. What makes you angry? I like that. For our checkout bit, we want to promote a bit of self-love, and it has been a really exploratory workshop, and obviously it's just started looking at things. It's just a really the first step on what is on, I mean, or a small step along your big journey already, but it is a really small step, and but it has still potentially brought up quite difficult things, and hard realizations, maybe on your treatment of others, or also how others have treated you. So to end, we're just going to invite everyone to close their eyes for a minute, and to think about something uplifting and supportive and full of self-care. And we want you to think of something that you are either proud of about yourself, or that you appreciate about yourself. And this could be absolutely anything. It could be part of your identity, it could be an achievement, it could be a realization, it could be anything, it could be several things. But just close your eyes and think about what you're proud of about yourself, and what you appreciate about yourself, and we'll give you a moment to be in that space. Okay, so what I'm going to post as place that you can continue any discussions that have started today. So it's the Lumio, and you're welcome. There is a kind of understanding ourselves and others workshop space. You can continue discussions with anyone. If you've connected with anyone, and you would like to and you'd like to continue any conversations you had, because obviously we didn't have that much time, then please let people know, or send them a message on this. I'm also going to post the timetable in the chat, and we have other sessions, a session on Sunday, which is oppression and movement building, and thinking about our relationship as activists, and you can join to the timetable, which should have the links in there to take you to that. And we're going to be sending up a follow-up email with a feedback form. We'd really appreciate it if you could give us some feedback. We would love that. It can help us improve. Like, this is the second big one we've done, and we're on a growing process. So please help us grow, and please let other people know about it. If you want to, let other people know about Trust the People. The course continues next week, and if you want to get involved in Trust the People, reach out to us. But we'll send you an email with some more information. But thank you so much. Hester?
There was a really good question in the chat that says, if you don't have enough time, because in the handout there's loads of exercises to do, so could we recommend 1 or 2 out of everything that's offered to do as homework if we don't have time to do everything that's in the handout?
Okay, so ones to recommend. Well, it depends. There are some in personal visioning that I think are really nice. In the personal visioning exercise sheet in personal processing, there are a few exercises. One, if you're creative, is like make a vision board where you just kind of like cut and put things, and it just helps you kind of ground you and think about what your aims and values are in life, or with this and what you're doing. But I will, in the follow-up email, I'll send a suggested recommended short exercise for you to do. But we will send out the resources for you. And thank you so much. We hope that you have got something out of this, and that you join us in the future. And the feedback form will be in the
feed. Sorry, I said the word homework. Thanks, Fish. Home play. Enjoy at home.
Thank you, everyone.